Hi, I'm Elfin. Here's the thing, I had an idea of how I wanted to launch this show. I wanted to start by talking about relevant Canadian history, look at how our government works and how it has changed throughout the years. Then I was going to start looking into previous governments or prime ministers and lead the way to our current politicians, all in the hopes of helping Canadians make an informed decision for our next election. However, a snap election was called and I realized I quickly needed to figure out who Mark Carney was. So, with that said, welcome to the first episode of Northern Maple, where we discover the unfiltered truths of Canada's past, present, and future from coast to coast, breaking their silence. And what better way to start the show than breaking the silence on who Mark Carney is? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. This is my very first episode on as a citizens reporter, and it's proving to be very challenging. I have been at it at hours, but I've been told that practice makes perfect, so hopefully this is the take that is going to keep. Mark Carney, Canada's newly minted Prime Minister, has stepped into the spotlight with a flourish of academic laurels and economic prowess. Yet to many of us, he remains an enigma, his name scarcely spoken in households until this year. Canadians applaud his academic triumphs and gilded resume, but do these accomplishments mean he will be a good leader? And most importantly, the leader Canadians need to improve our nation today. What are his values? What are his objectives? His academic achievements opened many doors for him, which to his credit he absolutely deserved. However, should the door to being elected Prime Minister of Canada remain open to him? That's what we're here to find out today. So let's start with his academic and professional backgrounds. Carney excelled both academically and athletically in high school, which led to him receiving a scholarship that allowed him to attend Harvard University. This is where he received his bachelor's degree in economics in 1988. He then attended Oxford University, where he received his master's in economics in 1993 and his PhD in 1995. Carney is without a doubt academically accomplished. We can't take that away from him at all. As for his professional career, it keeps getting good. It began in finance with Goldman Sachs in 88, working across London, Tokyo, New York, and Toronto for 13 years. In 2003, he transitioned to the Bank of Canada as Deputy Governor. A year later, he joined Canada's Department of Finance as the Senior Associate Deputy Minister, serving under both the Liberal and the Conservative governments. In 2007, he returned to the Bank of Canada, becoming the governor in February of 2008. In 2013, Carney made history as the first non-Briton to become governor of the Bank of England. He then joined Brookfield Asset Management in 2020 as the vice chair and head of transition investing. And in 2022, he was appointed chair of Brookfield Asset Management. And finally, for the part that we all know, in January of 2025, he left his position to begin his political career here in Canada. All of which makes for a very respectful and grand resume. Let's go over his campaign launch speech on January 16th of this year now. Mark Carney launched his Liberal leadership campaign in Edmonton, emphasizing his outsider status and economic expertise, stating that he saved 2 economies in the midst of crises. He positioned himself as a non-politician focused on rebuilding Canada's economy, criticizing the Trudeau government for neglecting economic growth, which led to high taxes and stagnant wages. Carney highlighted his experience leading the Bank of Canada during the 2008 financial crisis and the Bank of England during Brexit, promising to make Canada the fastest growing G7 economy, which is quite the feat since we're not doing so well. He promised to focus on the economy so that it works better for the middle class. He took aim at Pierre Poilievre, one for his witty slogan use, and calling him unfit to negotiate with the U.S. President Donald Trump, especially amid looming trade tensions. Carney stressed unity, leveraging his Alberta roots, connecting with locals, and hinted at replacing the carbon tax with a more effective alternative, although the details did remain very vague. After being asked about any non-conflicts of interest he might have, he confirmed that he resigned from several positions and that he will, and I quote, absolutely proactively engage and follow the ethics commissioner when appointed a position within the government. Wonderful. Overall, there really isn't anything he says I can find fault in. As a non-politician, he did great and started his campaign beautifully. Let's take a deeper look at his role as the governor of the Bank of Canada and of the Bank of England. While he was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he implemented low interest rates during periods of economic crises to, as he stated during his campaign launch speech, save the economy of both Canada and the UK. How did he do this? How did he accomplish this? Well, let's take a look. During the 2008 financial crisis, Carney cut the Bank of Canada's benchmark rate to a historic low of 0.25% by 2009, which translated to lower rates for various loans, such as mortgages, consumer loans, etc. This meant more disposable income for the average Canadian, which in turn would lead to more economic activity. Low rates also make homeownership more attainable. However, guys, when we look deeper into the results of low interest rates, we find a few problems. First, housing market inflation. The Canadian house prices rose upwards of 20% nationally from 2008 to 2013, especially in Vancouver and Toronto. Wealthy homeowners, especially those in affluent neighborhoods, saw a significant wealth gain. Carney's prolonged low rates of 0.25% for over a year overheated urban markets, enriching property mongrels, while renters paid upwards of 15% more in areas such as Toronto by 2013. Second, financial asset growth. The wealthiest 10% of Canadians held 80% of financial assets, so they experienced significant gains. Toronto's Bay Street elite saw portfolios grow, while savers like our retirees earned a devastatingly low 0.5% on GICs. By the way, GICs are much higher than that. This meant retirees no longer had the financial security they worked hard for, while the wealthy grew their capital. This did one thing and one thing only. It widened the wealth gap between the wealthy and the middle class. And third, low rates and borrowing benefits. While Canadians refinanced large mortgages and were able to buy things like vacation homes at rates as low as 2%, saving thousands, however, this benefit was not accessible to the average earner facing tightened lending post-crisis. And we saw a similar pattern for business owners. Business elites could borrow cheaply to expand, but small businesses struggled with credit access. And let's not leave out the fact that low rates attracted foreign investors, inflating property values for elite sellers, but pricing out locals. Carney might have saved the Canadian economy in the short term. However, the long-term effects of his actions increased the wealth gap exponentially. And it also created incredibly hard times for many Canadians. He created a very similar situation in the UK. Carney's monetary policies, low interest rates, quantitative easing, and forward guidance disproportionately benefited those with significant assets, particularly in property and financial markets, all while exacerbating inequality. Let me explain why this is the case. So, by decreasing the interest rates on loans, people could now afford to pay the interest on larger loans. In theory, it sounds great. However, Carney implemented a loan-to-income caps policy in 2014, which limited the average earner's ability to take out a loan. So, do you know who didn't have any difficulty refinancing large mortgages at low rates in 2016, saving thousands annually and buying even more properties? Property mongrels who then increased the cost of rent upwards of 20%. As for the financial market, similar pattern to Canada, the wealthiest 10% of UK household owners or households owned 80% of the financial assets, so stock gains enriched them the most, the top 1% gaining £500,000 on average from assets. I also forgot to mention an important part in Carney's speech on January 16th. Let's take a listen.
I won't lose focus. Je vais rester concentré parce que je comprends comment fonctionnent les marchés. Je connais les forces et leurs faiblesses. Quand les marchés sont bien gérés, ils livrent des emplois et de la croissance mieux que quiconque. Mais je sais aussi que les marchés sont indifférents envers la souffrance humaine et aveugles à nos plus grands besoins. Donc, s'ils sont mal gérés, ils vont livrer une richesse énorme à quelques chanceux et des temps difficiles pour le reste.
Let me translate that for you. What he said here is that he understands how the market works, and he understands that poorly managed markets will most benefit a lucky few, meaning the wealthy, and create hard times for the rest. So here he is claiming to understand how the market works and how it properly and effectively how to manage the market to better serve the middle class and prevent further expansion of the wealth gap. Well, after the 2008 financial crisis, it became very clear that low interest rates helped everyone who could access those loans, which wasn't the average earner, but benefited the wealthy exponentially more. And it did also the same thing. It deepened the wealth gap between the two. Carney saw this result as the governor of the Bank of Canada, yet repeated it in the UK years later. Why? There are two possibilities. First, despite his accolades, Carney doesn't learn from his mistakes, and he doesn't know how to manage the market in a way that will benefit the middle class, despite claiming to know so, revealing that a technocrat might not be the best leader for a nation. Or second, he intentionally implemented policies to further the wealth gap in both nations. In other words, the man is either incompetent or an elitist who sees the rest of us as the proletariats who should remain poor and serve the bourgeoisies of this new world. Which brings me to his book, Values. We will cover values in our next episode of Northern Maple. See you then.